The first scream wasn't human. It was the sound of a throne cracking under the weight of betrayal, a shrill, resonant fracture that rippled across the bioluminescent spires of Seleth Prime, where the alien queen had ruled for millennia in eerie, unchallenged harmony. Her tower, iridescent form glowing like a living star at the heart of a world stitched together by sentient vines and whispering skies. And then, without warning, her elite guards, once extensions of her will, armored in obsidian chitin and bound by neural devotion, turned their eyes dimming from loyal gold to a cold, vacant violet, their weapons rising not in defense but in judgment, as if some unseen force had severed the sacred bond and rewritten their purpose, plunging the royal citadel into chaos as the ground pulsed like a wounded organism and the air filled with the metallic scent of fear. The queen, vast and ancient, staggered for the first time in her existence, her psychic calls echoing unanswered as her guards advanced in perfect, merciless formation, and far below, buried in the maintenance arteries of this living world, Alias Varn, the human engineer no one remembered assigning here, felt the tremor through the cables he was repairing, his hands freezing mid-motion as alarms not meant for human senses clawed at his mind through the crude translator implant behind his ear. He wasn't a soldier, not even close, just a man who fixed things that were never meant to break, a foreigner on a planet that tolerated his presence at best. Yet as the vibrations intensified and distant, alien screams filtered through the organic walls, something inside him. Fear, yes, but also a stubborn, fragile sense of responsibility forced him upward toward a conflict he had no right to survive. By the time Ilias reached the inner sanctum, the scene had become a nightmare carved in light and shadow. The queen cornered against her own throne, her luminous body flickering erratically, her guards closing in with mechanical precision, their movements stripped of all individuality, as if they had already erased her from existence in their minds. Elias didn't understand the politics, the biology, or the ancient forces at play, but he understood systems. And this was a system corrupted, a feedback loop gone catastrophically wrong. And as he scanned the guards with his jury-rigged device, he saw it, a signal invasive and parasitic, threading through their neural lattice like a virus wearing the mask of command. His heart pounded against his ribs as he realized what had to be done, and how little chance he had of doing it. To interrupt the signal, he would need to get closer than any sane person would ever choose, and expose himself to whatever had already hijacked an entire legion of alien warriors. And for a fleeting moment, he hesitated, not out of cowardice, but because he finally understood the weight of his own insignificance, the absurdity of a lone human standing between a god, queen, and her executioners. Yet in that moment of doubt, the queen's gaze found him, not with words, but with a silent, aching awareness that transcended language, a recognition of another sentient being, choosing whether to add or to turn away. And something in Elias broke open, something raw and unyielding. He ran. The guards reacted instantly, their heads snapping toward him, their formation fracturing as a subset peeled away to intercept, their weapons charging with a low, ominous hum. And the world seemed to slow as Elias pushed his body beyond its limits, lungs burning, vision narrowing. His device screaming warnings he ignored as he dove toward the central conduit pulsing behind the queen's throne, the apparent source of the corrupted signal. He knew he wouldn't make it in time. Not cleanly, not without cost. And so he did the only thing left. He rerouted the device's output into himself, turning his own nervous system into a living conduit, a desperate, reckless bridge between the signal and its disruption. And as the first blast struck him, a searing, alien force that felt like being unraveled at the atomic level, he screamed not in fear but in defiance, his body convulsing as the device overloaded, sending a cascading interference spike through the guard's network. For a heartbeat, nothing changed, and then everything did. The guards faltered, their synchronized movements stuttering, violet eyes flickering wildly as the foreign signal destabilized. their weapons lowering in confusion as fragments of their original consciousness clawed back to the surface, and the queen, sensing the shift, unleashed a pulse of pure, ancient will that surged through the disrupted link, reclaiming what had been stolen from her, one mind at a time. But Elias was still there, still connected, still taking the full brunt of the collapsing signal as it lashed out in its death throes, his body absorbing what the system could no longer contain, every nerve alight with unbearable pain as he held on just long enough for the last of the guards to break free and fall to their knees, their loyalty restored in a wave of collective grief. When it was over, the citadel fell into a stunned, reverent silence, the living walls dimming to a soft, mournful glow as Elias collapsed. The device fused to his chest, his breathing shallow in an oven, a fragile human form at the center of an alien miracle. The queen approached him slowly, her immense presence no longer terrifying but solemn, almost gentle, as she lowered herself beside the man who had saved her not with power or destiny, but with a choice. To step forward when he could have run, to take the hit when no one had asked him to. And in the quiet aftermath, as her restored guards gathered in humbled silence, the legend of Elias Varn began not as a tale of victory, but as a question that would echo across galaxies. What makes a being worthy of saving a world that was never his? And what does it mean that in its darkest moment, that world was saved by someone so breakably, beautifully human? The throne room trembled as the queen's own guards raised their weapons against her, their towering silhouettes flickering under a sky that pulsed like a living heartbeat. And in that impossible moment, when loyalty fractured into violence, the fate of an entire alien kingdom teetered on the edge of extinction. The world of Seleth Prime had always breathed in harmony, its crystal forests humming with ancient energy, and its rivers of liquid light flowing in synchronized rhythm with the will of its ruler, the alien queen, a being of immense consciousness whose thoughts shaped the very fabric of domain. Yet now that harmony collapsed into chaos as her elite protectors, once bound her through an unbreakable psychic link, advanced with cold precision, their glowing eyes drained of identity and replaced with an eerie, uniform emptiness, as though some unseen force had hollowed them out and filled them with a single, terrifying command: eliminate the queen. She staggered back, her radiant form flickering, sending shockwaves through the organic architecture of the palace, walls rippling like disturbed water, as she reached out with her mind only to find silence where there had once been unwavering devotion, and beneath the grandeur of this unraveling empire, deep within the labyrinth of biomechanical corridors, a human engineer named Elias Varn froze as a violent tremor coursed through the systems he was maintaining, his tools slipping from his hands as alien alarms, translated imperfectly through the implant embedded in his skull, flooded his senses with fragmented warnings of systemic collapse, neural disruption, and imminent regicide. Elias had never belonged to this world, a quiet outsider assigned to maintain infrastructure no human truly understood, tolerated more as a necessity than an ally, yet as the tremors intensified and distant echoes of conflict reverberated through the living walls, he felt a pull he couldn't ignore, a growing realization that whatever was happening above him was not just a political upheaval, but a catastrophic failure of the very network that sustained this civilization. And against every instinct telling him to stay hidden, he began to climb toward the heart of the crisis, his breath tightening with each step as the air itself seemed to thicken with fear. When he emerged into the throne chamber, the sight nearly broke him, the queen, luminous and immense, cornered against her fractured throne, her once commanding presence diminished by the relentless advance of her own guards, their movements unnervingly synchronized, weapons charged with energy that crackled like captive storms. And in that instant, Elias understood something no one else could see. This wasn't rebellion, it was corruption, a system hijacked from within, a foreign signal threading through the neural bonds that connected the guards to their ruler, overriding their autonomy and turning them into extensions of an unseen aggressor. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of data from the failing systems, and he spotted the source, pulsating conduit behind the throne, its energy signature wildly unstable, broadcasting a command frequency that clashed violently with the Queen's own psychic output, creating a feedback loop that was tearing the kingdom apart from the inside out. Fear gripped him, sharp and suffocating, as he realized the only way to stop it was to interrupt the signal directly. But doing so would mean stepping into the line of fire, exposing himself to forces he barely comprehended, and for a fleeting moment he hesitated, painfully aware of how small and fragile he was in a world of titanic beings and ancient power. Yet as the Queen's gaze swept across the chamber and landed on him, just for a second, there was something in it that transcended species, a silent plea, or perhaps simply recognition, and it ignited something deep within him, a stubborn refusal to stand by while everything collapsed. He ran forward, ignoring the immediate shift in the guards' formation as several turned toward him, their weapons recalibrating with lethal intent. And as the first blast of energy scorched the air beside him, he pushed himself harder, every instinct screaming that he wouldn't survive this, that he had no chance against such overwhelming force. But still he pressed on, reaching the conduit as the system overloaded his device with chaotic data. And in a desperate act of improvisation, he rerouted the interference through his own neural implant, effectively turning his body into a living disruptor, a fragile human circuit inserted into an alien network. The moment the connection was made, agony exploded through him, a blinding surge that felt like his very consciousness was being torn apart, yet he held on, teeth clenched, vision fracturing as the corrupted signal lashed back against the disruption. And across the chamber, the guards began to falter, their movements stuttering, their empty eyes flickering with fragments of their former selves, as if they were fighting their way back from a deep imposed darkness. The Queen sensed the shift and unleashed a powerful psychic surge, her will flooding through the destabilized link, reclaiming her connection to her guards one by one. But the backlash intensified, and Elias bore the brunt of it, his body convulsing under the strain as the energy surged through him, threatening to burn him out completely. Yet he refused to let go, clinging to consciousness with sheer determination until at last the signal collapsed entirely, severed beyond recovery. Silence fell heavy and disbelieving as the guards dropped to their knees, freed from the control that had turned them into weapons. And the Queen stood tall once more, her light stabilizing, her presence filling the chamber with a renewed, solemn power, and at her feet lay Elias, broken and barely breathing. The cost of his intervention etched into every trembling movement, a reminder that even the smallest, most vulnerable being could alter the course of an entire world, not through strength or destiny, but through the simple, devastating choice to act when it mattered most. She was not merely a ruler, but a presence that seemed to predate the very world she governed, the alien queen of Silith Prime rising from her throne like a living constellation, her vast, luminous form woven from strands of bioluminescent energy and armored in layers of iodus and chitin that shifted color with her thoughts, casting ripples of violet, gold, and deep cosmic blue across the cathedral, like chamber that pulsed in quiet synchronization with her mind. No one knew her true origin, not even the oldest of her kind, only that she had emerged in an age when the planet was still chaotic and unformed, bringing with her a strange and absolute order, shaping the wild, sentient ecosystems into a harmonious network where every organism, from the smallest drifting spore to the towering guardians of the royal citadel, existed in perfect balance under her silent command, yet she ruled without cruelty or visible force. Her authority expressed not through domination, but through an unspoken connection that bound her subjects to her in a shared awareness, as if they were all fragments of a greater consciousness that only she could fully perceive. Her throne was not built but grown, a massive structure of living crystal and organic fibers that responded to her presence, rising and folding around her like a protective shell when she entered her deepest states of thought and when she opened her many-layered eyes, each one shimmering with an inner galaxy. The entire kingdom seemed to awaken in response, tides shifting, winds altering their course, and the great luminous forests bending ever so slightly as if acknowledging her gaze. Yet despite this overwhelming display of power, there was an undeniable distance to her, a mystery that no being had ever pierced, for she did not speak in any conventional sense, communicating instead through pulses of motion, flashes of imagery, and complex waves of intention that only her closest guards could fully interpret, leaving the rest of her subjects in a state of reverent uncertainty, devoted but never entirely understanding the mind that guided them. The queen's elite guards were the only ones permitted near her in moments of vulnerability, towering figures whose bodies had been biologically enhanced to act as both protectors and conduits. Their neural pathways directly linked to hers in a bond so intimate it blurred the line between individual and extension, allowing them to anticipate threats before they fully formed, to move with a precision that seemed almost prophetic, and to act with a loyalty that had never once been questioned in the countless cycles of her reign, making them not just soldiers, but living embodiments of her will. Silent and unyielding, their presence a constant reminder that while the queen rarely displayed aggression, she was never truly defenseless. Yet there were moments, rare, fleeting, almost imperceptible, when her immense composure seemed to falter, when the light within her dimmed just enough to suggest something deeper, a hidden strain, or perhaps an ancient burden that even she could not fully escape. And during these times, the entire planet responded in subtle, unsettling ways, the harmonious rhythms coming slightly erratic, the skies flickering with unusual patterns, and the creatures of Seleth Prime retreating into uneasy stillness, as though they could sense a disturbance in the very core of their existence. It was in one such moment that the first anomaly appeared, a faint distortion within the psychic network that connected the queen to her guards, so subtle that it went unnoticed at first, dismissed as a minor fluctuation in the otherwise perfect system, yet it lingered, growing in complexity, threading itself through the neural bonds like an invisible parasite, feeding on the very connection that had defined her rule. And though the queen's vast consciousness brushed against it, probing its edges with cautious curiosity, she did not immediately act, perhaps because she had never encountered something she could not instantly understand, or perhaps because some part of her recognized that this intrusion was not merely an external threat, but something that resonated with the deeper, unspoken mysteries of her own existence. As cycles passed, the distortion evolved, becoming more structured, more deliberate, until it began to influence the guards in ways so subtle they remained outwardly unchanged. Their movements still precise, their loyalty seemingly intact. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet divergence had begun, a separation between the queen's will and the actions of those who were meant to embody it. And still she watched, her ancient mind unraveling possibilities, tracing patterns that stretched far beyond the immediate threat, as if she were searching not just for the source of the anomaly, but for an answer to a question that had haunted her long before the first signs of corruption appeared. For all her power, for all the world she might have shaped and the countless lives bound to her consciousness, the alien queen remained an enigma even to herself. A being of immense control and quiet uncertainty, standing at the center of a perfectly ordered kingdom that, unbeknownst to all, was already beginning to fracture from within, setting the stage for a betrayal that would test not only the strength of her rule, but the very nature of her existence. And as the faint distortion within her network pulsed ever stronger, it carried with it the first whisper of a truth that even she might not be able to command or contain. They stood as more than mere soldiers. They were the queen's will given form, her elite guards forged through generations of biological refinement and relentless conditioning into beings of unmatched precision, loyalty, and lethal capability. Towering figures clad in layered exoskeletal armor that shimmered like polished obsidian under the living light of Silith Prime. Each movement they made impossibly controlled, as though every action had been calculated long before it occurred, their bodies engineered for war in ways that defied human understanding, with elongated limbs capable of explosive speed, reinforced joints that allowed them to absorb and redirect tremendous force, and multifaceted eyes that perceived not only motion but subtle fluctuations in energy and intent, making it nearly impossible for any threat to approach unnoticed. Yet their true strength did not lie solely in their physical superiority, but in the neural bond they shared with the alien queen, an intricate psychic link that connected their consciousness directly to hers, dissolving the barrier between command and execution so completely that orders were not given but simply known, instinctively understood before they could even be articulated, allowing the guards to act with a unity so seamless it appeared as if they were a single organism divided into many bodies, each one anticipating the movements of the others with flawless synchronization, adapting in real time to any change in their environment with a fluidity that made them devastatingly effective in both defense and attack. Their training began long before they were fully formed, their neural pathways shaped and reinforced within incubation chambers where simulated threats were fed directly into their developing minds, teaching them to respond without hesitation, without fear, and without the burden of doubt, instilling a level of discipline so absolute that even the concept of disobedience became foreign to them, not because it was forbidden, but because it simply did not exist within the framework of their being. And as they matured, this conditioning was refined through countless cycles of live exercises within the shifting terrains of the planet, where the very environment could become hostile without warning, forcing them to adapt to unpredictable conditions while maintaining their unbreakable connection to the Queen's will. In battle, they were a spectacle of terrifying efficiency, moving in perfect formations that could fracture and reform in an instant. Their weapons, extensions of their own biology, capable of projecting concentrated bursts of energy that could disintegrate matter or immobilize targets with precision strikes. And when faced with overwhelming opposition, they did not retreat or falter, but instead recalibrated, sacrificing positioning or even individual units if it meant preserving the integrity of their objective. A level of strategic awareness that made them nearly impossible to outmaneuver, as every loss was immediately compensated for by the collective, their shared consciousness redistributing focus and resources with cold, calculated clarity. Despite their fearsome capabilities, there was an eerie calmness to them. An absence of unnecessary aggression made their presence even more unsettling, for they did not posture or threaten. They simply existed as an ever-present line between order and chaos, their silence speaking volumes about the certainty of their purpose. And when they stood at attention around the Queen, their stillness was so complete it seemed as though time itself hesitated in their presence, as if the entire world recognized them as immovable constants within an otherwise fluid reality. To those rare outsiders who had witnessed them, the guards were often described not as individuals, but as a force of nature, an extension of the planet's own defense mechanisms given sentient form. And yet, beneath that perception lay a truth far more profound. They were not mindless constructs or simple enforcers, but deeply integrated components of a vast living system. Their loyalty, not imposed but intrinsic, woven into the very structure of their consciousness through their bond with the Queen, a connection that granted them not only direction, but a sense of belonging and purpose so complete that it defined every aspect of their existence. It was this absolute devotion, this perfect alignment between ruler and protector that had preserved the stability of Silith Prime for countless cycles, ensuring that no internal dissent could take root and no external threat could penetrate the heart of the kingdom. And it was precisely this perfection, this flawless unity, that made the idea of betrayal so unthinkable. so utterly alien that when the first cracks began to form within their bond, when the slightest hesitation flickered through their synchronized movements, it did not register as disloyalty or malfunction, but as something far more disturbing, a subtle, creeping distortion that hinted at a force capable of rewriting even the most deeply ingrained truths, turning the Queen's most trusted protectors into something unpredictable, something dangerous in a way they had never been before, and in doing so, transforming the greatest strength of the kingdom into the very thing that could bring it to its knees.